Greetings and welcome to another Live with Kevin on a Monday at noon Eastern Time, when is probably the most common time that I join you. I'll be with you several times this week. I'm looking forward to that. Some of you are joining us for the first time, and so you don't know. But for some of you, you know that I'm not in my normal location. So we've got a blurred background, a little bit different today, but I'm looking forward to being with you and bringing in my two guests here in just a second. If you're with us live, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to go into whatever social platform you're on right now, go into the comments, say hello, tell us where you're located. That gives my guests and I a chance to have a sense of who's here, but it does something else. It gets you involved from the beginning, which is my goal, because if rather than being virtual, we were gathered around a table having a conversation, and you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you would share it. If you had an insight, you would offer it. If you had an idea, right, you would offer that as well. So do that here just as if we were all around the table having a cup of coffee, a glass of water, or whatever. And when you do that, this will be more valuable for you. But when you do that, this will also be a more effective podcast eventually, which is what it will be eventually, as you can see up over my shoulder, that shoulder. This will be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, and I just looked it up. It won't come out on the podcast until January the 1st. So there you have it. A couple of months early by watching it here live or watching the replay here. So now let me do a countdown for Marissa. So we'll do the start of the podcast in 3, 2, 1. Would you like to see into the future just a bit? If you could see the future a bit more clearly, you could make better decisions, have better predictions, have a better perspective, and ultimately create greater success. That is part of our role as a leader, after all, is to create greater success. That's why I'm excited to introduce the work of our guests to you today. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, in the future, you could join us live. In this particular case, this went live on the live stream video version about 2.5 months before you're getting the chance to see it on the podcast. So if you want to get in front of those things and have a chance to interact in a live way, you can do that, learning more about when those are going to happen and how they happen by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that. Today's episode is brought to you by the second edition of the Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. If you lead a team that is distributed in any way, this book will give you new skills, insights, and the confidence to lead more effectively in the new world of work. Learn more and order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/LDL. And now I'm going to bring in my guests. And yes, it's guests. Today we have two guests, co-authors of this book. I will tell you about them as they join us and you see their smiling faces. Today I have with us Rob Wolcott and Kaihan Krippendorff. Robert C. Wolcott is the co-founder and chair of the World Innovation Network, Twin Global. He is an adjunct professor of innovation at the Booth School of Business, University of Chicago, and an adjunct professor of executive education at the Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern University. His books include Grow From Within, Mastering Corporate Entrepreneurship and Innovation, written with Michael J. Lippitz. He is an active venture investor in nearly 30 companies. Kaihan Krippendorff is the founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank and professional speaker. His books include Driving Innovation from Within, a guide for internal entrepreneurs. He's a former McKinsey consultant, a strategic advisor to numerous leading corporations. Well, why the two of them together? Well, because they've written together a new book called Proximity: How Creating Breakthroughs in Just-in-Time Transform Business, Society, and Daily Life. That's our focus today. That's why they're here, and I'm glad they're here. So, guys, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
Kevin. Great to be here.
So, Rob, a little inside baseball, everybody. Rob said, Kevin, what's the first question going to be? I said, I'm not going to ask you that something you don't already know the answer to. So I'm just going to start with one that is really simple, and it's something I ask often. And that's like, tell us a little bit about, and Rob, I'll let you go first, but tell us a little bit about what led to the book? We'll talk about the book and the ideas in the book in a second, but like, what's the journey that brings the two of you to this place and this book?
Well, thanks again, Kevin, for having us. I love your work. It's expansive and applied, and I love that. So, from where did this come? Well, 10 years ago in 2014, I was at a tech event, and Kevin, I'm sure you've been to tech events. I'm sure everybody else out there in TV land, they go to tech events, and I noticed that the second speaker sounded like the first, and the third speaker sounded like the second, and the fourth speaker sounded like I started to say, well, holy cow, we've got to be able to do better to figure out where the world's going. And so that generated a question in my mind at that time, which is, what is fundamentally different about all things digital compared to the industrial age? If we can discern what is fundamentally different about digital technologies compared to industrial age technologies, we could do better jobs of predicting the future. And Kaihan and I do mean predicting. This is a book about foresight. This is a book predictive of where every industry is going the rest of our careers. And at working on that for a while, I discovered something sort of obvious that led to a profound observation. And that the obvious thing is that digital technologies of all sorts, so certainly we mean AI and mobile apps, but we also mean 3D printing or rooftop solar power or anything digitally enabled. Digital technologies allow us to compress capabilities into smaller and smaller packages and distribute them all over the economy, ever closer to each moment in time and space. That's something that's very hard to do with industrial age technologies. And so therefore, and this is proximity, this is the punchline, Kevin, digital compels value creation ever closer to the moment of actual demand in time and space. And this is the direction of every industry, the rest of our careers. And then so I was working on this and COVID hit, and you might recall, Kevin, there's something called COVID, and all of a sudden we're all at home.
Back when Corona was still beer, right?
Yeah, right. And so Kaihan reached out to me. We'd known each other for a little while, thanks to our good friend Jill Hellman. And Kaihan said, we're at Outthinker Networks. We're going to have a 24-hour thought leadership session. Each speaker, 1 hour, 24 of those in a row. It was an amazing vision. They did it. I had a bunch of really fantastic speakers, myself notwithstanding. We had like Rita Gunter McGrath and Kaihan. You can tell Kevin a little bit how that came together and why we ended up working together on proximity.
Yeah, COVID hit and suddenly my speaking schedule went to zero. Everything was canceled and postponed. And then I figured, hey, there are two things going on in the world. One is people need support. And two, there are all these great minds that are suddenly grounded. So could we raise money to support some nonprofits that are helping people that are dealing with COVID, get food to children, et cetera, and get these thought leaders involved? So we organized this 24-hour, 24 speakers over one day event. And Rob was one of those people. There was Amy Edmondson. There was Renee Mauburn, the Blue Ocean strategy person. There was Gary Hamill, kind of like really the best of the best. And Rob was one of those people. And we did we worked with, again, because there's so much talent available. We had someone who is an expert in data visualization. He was available, so he just volunteered. And he was able to measure what were the frequency of different words that were spoken and then respoken and shared. And what was the most spoken and respoken word was Rob's concept of proximity. And so that led to this insight, like this idea clarifies for people a lot of stuff that seems to be disparate things going on, and it's a unifying concept. So when Rob asked me if I would be willing to contribute to the book and participate with him in writing the book, I jumped at the chance.
So that is the title of the book, Proximity. There's a subtitle, of course, too, but the proximity is the key word. It's the title of the book. And so, Rob, tell us a little bit more about, I mean, you hinted at it already, but what would you add to this sort of definition as the opening salvo of our conversation?
Great. Well, in the book, Kevin, we look across different realms of life. You can think industries, but we really, Kaihan and I thought about it more like about how we live and how it affects all of us. So how we work, how we eat, how we create and produce, how we prevent and cure, how we power, how we defend. And the final chapter is about the two horizons of the 21st century, the places humanity has not been before, but will this century: space and virtual reality. And by the way, space and virtual reality are 100% proximate. We can come back to that if that's of interest. But in chapter 2, we talk about a hypothetical concept that clarifies this proximity notion, and we call it P equals 0. P equals 0 refers to proximity equals 0. In other words, the production of value or the provision of value, and we separate those two because they operate differently, at the moment of actual demand. So P equals 0 is in some cases already true. Like, for instance, if you think about video streaming, Kevin, you can watch as much of the Kardashians as you want, anytime, anywhere. Now, we're not saying that that's...
You don't know how much of that I'm going to watch? We could say people could watch us after we finish this.
Yes.
In any place, right?
Exactly. That's great. But the point is, anybody could, with an access to a device, can watch any video, anytime, anywhere. But most of those videos have been produced months or even decades in advance. Now, here's the thing: the provision of all video content is already proximate. It's anywhere, anything, anytime. But
it's us right now.
Just like right now,
right.
People are live, but a year from now, 2 years from now, God willing, they'll still be able to find this podcast anywhere and listen to it on any device. But here's illustrative of this predictive power of proximity. Production of video content is not yet entirely proximate. It was probably created months ago, maybe decades ago. But here's the interesting thing: with generative AI, where are we right now? We're at the very beginning, the knee of the curve, for a future that is definitely coming. This is, well, I wonder if, no, this is definitely coming, where video content will be created on demand, anywhere, anytime, and eventually for an audience of one. So it will figure out, boy, Kevin Eikenberry wants a story about XYZ now, and generative AI in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, imagine what it will be able to do. So this is, again, predictive of where we're going for the rest of our careers.
Kaihan, anything you want to add to that before we, or anything else perhaps you want to say about the concept?
Yeah, no, maybe just like maybe two things that Rob said that I'll just kind of link that maybe people haven't completely linked is you compress value into parts, and then we have proximity, and value is created when the parts come together. When the soda meets the syrup for the Coca-Cola, for example. And so what we're saying is, because these things get compressed and distributed, we can wait until we know there's demand and then combine them and create the value.
Yeah, that's great. Kevin, proximity is about procrastination, believe it or not. I remember when we were interviewing Dean Kamen, the famous inventor of the Segway, but many other things. Mm-hmm. He said the best way to make things is to wait as long as possible until there's a specific demand, and that's proximity. So we really mean to set up business models, technology platforms that encourage us to procrastinate until there's a specific need for a specific product, service, or experience, and then produce and provide. And that's where every industry is going.
So we'll get into some more of that in general before we're done, but you laid this out a little bit about how the book is laid out, which is around some sort of specific parts of our lives. And I think once you tell us this idea of proximity, we all start to think of a few examples. But what you did, and I really love that you didn't do it in terms of industries, but really more about sort of on the user side, if you will. Mm-hmm. And you talked about a variety of these, and we won't have time to get to all of them that are in the book. But I do want to talk about, I think, the ones that are sort of the most prescient. I'll continue to use P words like you guys for all of us as individuals, consumers, and as leaders. And so, like in the book, we'll start with the most of those, which is like how work is different. Like, how does proximity and work connect? What do you mean by that? I mean, obviously, if my work involves using a 3D printer, okay. But fundamentally, what do you mean by this? Because this is probably where your thinking and the work we've done is the most interconnected. So
Yeah.
let's talk about this a little bit first, and we'll go to a few of the others before we're done.
Well, I'll cover an obvious experience we've all had now that we didn't really have before. Very few of us had before COVID, and that is what we're doing right now. Zoom calls, streamcast podcast recording, for instance. And I remember early in COVID, I was on a Zoom with a friend of mine remotely describing proximity. And he said, well, that sounds nice, but it feels like what we're doing right now on the screen is the opposite of proximity. And I said, no. It's exactly proximity. Why is that? Because he happened to be sitting in New York. I was in Evanston, Illinois at the time. I said, we're creating value right here on the screen. It has nothing to do with where your physical body is. So you can accomplish things, anything, anywhere, anytime. And so everybody's experience of being thrust into their home offices and having Zoom and Teams meetings, that's entirely proximity. Because now it doesn't matter that you're in Michigan and I'm in New Jersey and, maybe Kaihan's in Miami. We can create value right here on the screen.
It's interesting because I went to the movie yesterday, and by the way, the movie that I went to, I'm going to
like a movie theater,
because the director of that movie is going to be on this show in 2 days.
Oh wow, that's exciting!
But anyway, during the commercials, of course, of which there are now many, there was a commercial for the MetaQuest headset of Facebook's or Meta's. And the interesting thing is, it's one of the things you just said, Rob, is one of the things that they sort of talked about, or the examples that they used of using this device. One of them was these two people who were in a relationship but were far apart, using those goggles, than goggles, but using those devices to play a game together, right? Even though they aren't physically proximate, right? So it's another example of what you're talking about.
That's it.
Absolutely.
So beyond that thing that thing called Zoom that no one had heard of, and then it became a tool, and then it became a source of anxiety for people. In the course of about 2 years, somewhere in there it was a verb too, right? But beyond that sort of really obvious, and I'm glad that you shared it that way because it is one, I think. What are some other examples about how how can we use the idea of proximity to further help us predict where we think the future of work is going?
Well, I think you could think of work as supply and demand, that there is a job that needs to be done, and then there's talent that can do the job. So what we're saying, if we imagine P equals 0, is I need someone to fix my refrigerator, and boom, that person is there. I need someone to write a report for a meeting that I have in 5 minutes, and that person is there and they write the report. So all the barriers between today and then. So, look at TaskRabbit, look at gig working, look at the shift from roles to OKRs, the fragmentation of jobs and what skills people have. Look at Upwork. All of that allows us to find the talent that we need more quickly. And then we add AI, which allows us to then scale the capabilities of someone. Hey, I don't know how to write a report, but with AI, I can either learn it or I don't need to learn it, but I can do it immediately because it is, because AI is guiding me. It allows us to kind of reduce that supply and demand gap down to 0.
Yeah, Kevin, the AI point that Kaihan mentioned is absolutely essential because it's quintessential proximity. With AI systems, you can compress this extraordinary capability, offer it anywhere, and the system from the user's perspective sits there doing nothing at all. Now, we know there's a server in Iceland and there's lots of stuff going on behind. But from the user's perspective, when you jump on ChatGPT or Pi or any of these platforms, it's a blank screen. And then you throw a prompt in, and seconds later, it's created something. Now, it may or may not be what you want. That's your job to figure out. But that capability is getting better and better, and it's distributing all over the place, every moment of your day, every aspect of your job. And so our role as leaders is to help our people and ourselves figure out how to leverage these capabilities most effectively, often to do things we couldn't have done before.
Yep. And
if I could, please.
I'll pull one thing one word that Rob used. He said, create something. And I think that's a very important point, because in a way, what we're saying is there is no reason to predict anymore, because it is the user's input. They're not asking, can you search Google for content that was created before that's relevant to me? Can you search Amazon for a product that was made before that is relevant? You actually can initiate the creation of that thing. It's much more Etsy than Amazon. And so in a way that removes the need for prediction. Now, we do say prediction because the idea of P=0 allows you to more accurately predict where the industry is going. But the industry that you're in, the future is no prediction, because you're only producing when things are needed.
Gotcha. So perhaps because I grew up on a farm and because I happen to be near that particular location as I'm doing this particular episode, the next chapter is probably the other one that we'll have the chance to really dive into the most yet. It is the idea of, the chapter is titled Proximity and How We Eat. And so what do you mean by that? Like, not everyone's got a garden, right? And even if you have a garden, you have to grow it, right? You don't have it instantly. So what do you guys, because this might seem antithetical to people until they start to see your thinking. So go tell us about what you mean here, and what does this tell us about where we're headed?
Yeah, well, Kaihan, why don't you share briefly the Domino's example, because that's really tangible for people, and it also shows that proximity is not just about making the pizza. It's about all the other things that wrap around it that add value for the consumer. And then I can talk about some crazy stuff I saw in the UAE and controlled environment agriculture and stuff like that.
Right. That's great. Yeah. So we can, I had a bad experience this weekend. My family was over and we ordered bad pizza, and I got a lot of flack for it. I ended up grilling pizza yesterday and making up for it. But the experience of getting the pizza isn't just getting the food in your mouth, right? It is also knowing, did I order the right thing? Are they using the right ingredients? Is it properly quality checked? Is it on my way, right? Is it going to arrive in time before the movie starts, right? All of that is part of the value of ordering pizza. And what Domino's was able to do, because that part of the value proposition can be delivered digitally through their app. And they had invested for other reasons in technology to kind of automate their production line. They now had all this information, and they were able to deliver that part of the experience. I pull up my app and I can see it's being quality checked, it's being shipped, it's being sent, and what time it's going to arrive. All of that value got to me a little bit faster than Pizza Hut or other places. And for the time period that we analyzed, a 10-year time period, Domino's stock price outperformed Google's and many high-tech companies. And it was only due to proximity, and not proximity of the physical product, but proximity of the digitally deliverable elements of the value proposition. Right. So you can already, with a small advantage of proximity, already have a huge business advantage, a competitive advantage. And then now maybe Rob, you can talk about actually the producing of the food more quickly.
Yeah, sure. And I think I want to, Kevin, underscore one thing that Kaihan just said. Certainly there are these big breakthrough concepts, but there are also lots of really kind of small steps. You just need a small advantage in proximity to be far more competitive than other companies. But I'll give you a little bit of the further out picture. So in late 2022, when I was doing some research for the book, I was speaking at an event in the UAE, in Dubai, and I had the opportunity to go and visit Bustanica. So Bustanica is the largest vertical farm and operation in the world today. It's part of a larger frame called controlled environment agriculture. So you can think of greenhouses and all this. And most vertical farms have not been economically viable yet. That's absolutely true. By the way, the key to vertical farming, the key to proximate agriculture is proximate power, proximate, sustainable, affordable power. So when we solve that problem, we've solved the proximity of any kind of agriculture. Set that aside. So I visit Bustanica. It's a partnership with Emirates Airlines. It's a few miles from the Dubai airport. First of all, the leafy greens and herbs grown there are as good as anything you'd get in a French farmer's market. No offense to the French. I hope nobody's upset. But this stuff was fantastic. But here's the exciting part. The next morning, I got on my flight from Dubai back to New York City, and the lettuce in my salad was picked at that plant the night before. Now, they use 98% less water. They grow only what they need, where and when they need it, far less waste. Now, it is absolutely true that each head of lettuce grown there is far more expensive than growing heads of lettuce in Spain. I get it. But here's the thing, that the people at Emirates told me they looked at the overall systemic cost and responsiveness of growing lettuce in Spain, harvesting it in advance, putting on a ship, sending it to a warehouse, hoping that some part of it is still good enough for the salad on my flight. And when they did the overall systemic cost, it was by far better to be producing right there in that vertical farm. And the punchline is, Kevin, since Kaihan and I finished the document for the book, in February of this year, Emirates announced they were buying 100% of Bustanica. So they've acquired the entire company. So this stuff is starting slowly. It's just like all disruptive technologies. It doesn't work for most cases, but over time, people find the right applications that make money, that are value added. They get better and better. They run up the learning curve, and over the medium to long term, they change the game. And that's what's going on right now with proximity.
And the controlled environment farming allows us to also reduce the incubation time or the growth time of food, so we can actually produce food more rapidly. And those spaces are getting smaller and smaller. Mila has a whole division that makes refrigerator-sized or appliance-sized vertical farms that you can put into your house.
I saw one of those in Greece.
You did? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I've only
at
seen,
an event
I've only
space.
spoken
And
them.
I'm talking, and my host said, well, there's one of them right here.
I'm going to get one.
There you have it. So we could, and I knew this would be the case, not only because of the depth of the book, but by having both authors with me today, that we would never get through everything, which is one of the reasons why you get yourself a copy of Proximity by Rob Wolcott and Kaihan Krippendorff, of course, and we'll have all the links to that in the show notes at the end as well. You talk about a lot of other things. You talk about preventions and cures. You talk about power. You talk about a lot of other things, as you mentioned earlier. We don't have time to get there. I just want to spend a couple minutes because you've done a good job of giving people the nugget of the idea, and we've talked about several examples. And so my question is, where should we as leaders, now not everyone who's listening here is a senior executive, right, or an entrepreneur or leading a tech company, but like for any of us as leaders, what should we be doing now? Like, what would you recommend to any leader thinking about their organization, their career, their future? What are the questions or things they should be thinking about and taking action on right now?
Right.
Maybe I gave like a 30-second answer real quick. Really 4 steps. Envision P equals 0 in your industry. Step 2, break down all the barriers that currently exist between current state and P equals 0. It takes this long to grow a banana. It takes this long to ship it. It takes this long, and it goes out. Then go through the proximity technology, where there's AI, 3D printing, and the rest, and then map those up and identify and prioritize the opportunities. And just pick 1 or 2 opportunities, technology combined with a barrier, and then prioritize those to just get a little bit ahead of the competition.
Yeah, I'd add to this, Kevin. And by the way, in our book, we have the Proximity Strategy Workbook, which is in the appendix. And obviously, Kaihan and I are always happy to engage with readers and leaders who'd like a little extra help, but you don't need us there to work with that workbook. Go through it and see what it means in your industry and for your customers and customers' customers. But I'd add to that, as an active investor, so I'm an active venture investor, but also public markets, I've been for a few years now looking for companies that are way ahead in terms of proximity. And I'll just give you a couple of publicly traded examples if people want to go take a look and see what this has meant. Look at, for instance, Axon Corporation, which is in public safety and security. So they pioneered the taser. We all know that. But then later on, they added body cams, police body cams. And then they started collecting data from all these body cams and doing analytics. And then earlier this year, they introduced a generative AI capability so the officer can push a button and, using the body cam data, populate the police report. instantaneously. Now, of course, we all know police officers love writing police reports, so I'm sure that they wouldn't want to do this. But can you imagine eliminating the need to fill out that police report and how much more time?
Or getting it 80% there, right? And
yeah,
then
getting it 80% there, then editing it. It's profound. And then top that off with, they just acquired an indoor drone company and an outdoor drone company. And this company, Axon, it just joined S&P 500. They just keep growing, and they keep blowing away the street's numbers because most market analysts have not figured out the fundamental proximity driver of their strategy. Yeah.
So, well, you said you were going to give us 2. You gave us 1. You got another one for everybody?
Sure. I mean, I can keep going. There's another one that the market. So Axon it's up like 100 and some % just in the past year. I stand by it, but look, I'm not making any recommendations here because it's pretty highly valued. But one that the market hasn't really respected yet is in 3D printing. And you've probably heard a ton about 3D printing, and people are saying, see, I told you that's not going to work. People have been talking about it for a long time. But, that's what happens with disruptive technologies. There's a lot of hype, and then we underperform, and people say, see, I told you that's not going to work. A bunch of companies go bankrupt or go out of business, which has been happening. But what also happens when the carnage is out there, there'll be a few companies, and this has happened many times in history, there'll be a few companies that are well capitalized, that have a solid strategy, and they go up and they start buying up these other assets, technologies, companies that have meaningful stuff, and they roll them together. So right now, a company doing that's still under the radar is called Nano Dimension. They are becoming the leader in additive manufacturing. 3D printing is part of additive manufacturing. They just this year confirmed they're going to be buying direct metal. They're buying Mark Forged. They're rolling up these companies. It's still like $2.30 a share or something like that. But their market cap, Kevin, is equal to the cash they have on the balance sheet after these acquisitions. So you're just at the very beginning of seeing these things roll out.
I feel like there should be some kind of liability statement there.
Well, I was just going to say, like, no,
you are an investor, and you're not.
Don't take my advice. I'm just telling you that I have personally.
Investments are risky, and we can roll that. There'll be no disclaimer, everybody, but because this is
I have personally invested.
Performance is not an indicator of.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, I have personally invested. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah. You do what you want. It's all on you. But
just log on to wolcottinvestments.com.
Well, that's not the link that I had. So I want to ask both of you a couple other questions I'd like to ask all of my guests before we finish. And the first one is, Kaihan, you first. What do you do for fun?
Oh, I cook. I love to cook.
Yeah.
I'm a an amateur chef is how I would characterize myself.
Okay.
Actually, Kevin, half of Kaihan's feed is proximity, and the other half is stuff he just cooked.
It's stuff I just cooked. Yeah. Yep. I can show you the pizzas that I made yesterday.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you mentioned that already.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then the other question, and I'm going to have Rob go first because he knows the question, and I'm not sure in the pre-conversation kind that you heard this, so you'll get the chance to hear it because I'll make Rob go first. So, Rob, what are you reading these days?
Well, I love history. It's also your other question. What do you do for fun? There's nothing I love more than reading great history. And I discovered a couple of books that have been reprinted that won Pulitzer Prizes back in the 20s and 30s about American history. And it's fascinating to see the perspective at that time. So one I'm reading right now is called The Founding of New England. It won the Pulitzer Prize, I think, in 1922. And it's a fascinating read. I already knew quite a bit about the history of New England, and I have to say I've learned probably 2x what I knew before from this book.
Awesome. Kaihan, what are you reading?
Yeah. So I have a podcast, and so I'm always getting pitch books, and I read. But there are two that this one I just pulled up. I really like this. This is kind of an unknown book. Data Rules: Reinventing the Market Economy. Christina Alaimo and Janice Kalinikos, and it sort of says, hey, data isn't just information. Data are social constructions that change the way people think, and so it is a very kind of forward-thinking view on data and how it is going to how it's shaping companies and industries. And I also really am loving Marcus Collins wrote a book called For the Culture. He is sort of a marketing guru who was involved, for example, in developing the brand Beats, which was Dr. Dre's collaboration sold to Apple. So it's like brands should create cultures around them that inform identity and have customers and employees be kind of link their identity to, and that's where the strength of brands come from. Those are two books that I'm very into right now.
Perfect. All of that, everybody, will be in the show notes, along with a link to these fine gentlemen's book, Proximity: How Coming Breakthroughs in Just-in-Time Transform Business, Society, and Daily Life. Beyond that, though, beyond getting a copy of the book, where you guys want to point people to learn more about your work, or any place else you want to point people?
Great. I'm always on LinkedIn, Robert C. Wolcott. You can always reach me there, and let me know that we met on Kevin's podcast, because I guess really we didn't meet, but reach out on LinkedIn. And also you can find me at twinglobal.org.
Yep. For me, LinkedIn. And then also we have proximitybook.net as well.
Proximitybook.net. So a question for all of you before I say goodbye to all of those of you watching and listening, and to you, Robin Kaihan. Question for all of you that I ask you every single week as viewers and listeners. And the question is, now what? What action will you take as a result of being here? What things did you make note of? And no, we're not talking about the investment advice. We are talking, however, about what ideas did you get about the how can you apply the idea of proximity? How will you, really is the question, how will you apply that idea? What actions might you take versus some of the things that you heard about the predictive nature of it, or even just to start to build a new perspective around all of it, along with the ideas that you just heard about what we can be doing next as leaders to start to reduce the friction and move us closer to P=0. My point here is this, everybody, that if you don't take action, this might have been entertaining, but you could have probably found better entertainment purely. Ultimately, you came here so that you could become more effective. Well, I know. I said maybe. Could you maybe? Like, my point is, we do hope that this was entertaining, but we also hope this is something that you can use to transform your future and become a more effective leader, create more effective organizations, make a bigger positive change in the world. That's what we're here for. That's what we'll be back to do again next week. Thanks, guys, for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. It was great.
Thanks, Kevin.
Everybody, we will be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Until then, tell someone that you heard this, invite them to join you. You know what to do wherever you're watching your podcast. We'll see you soon. Thanks.